I might just kick us off straight away. So welcome everyone to WACOSS's weekly Wednesday webinars. There's a lot of W's there, the WWW. Before we start, I just want to acknowledge the elders of the land in which I'm joining you from today, Wajutnua country, and pay my respects to elders past and present, but also acknowledge many of you might be joining us from other areas, and so want to pay respects to all of the elders of the lands that you are also joining us from today. So just a couple of Zoom etiquette pieces before we start. If you can just make sure you remain on mute, that would be great. But do please keep your video on because it's great to be able to see all your faces. So we have about 84 people registered, although obviously there'll be a bit of a drop off, but it'd be great to see as many of you as possible. Where the screen isn't being shared, we just encourage you to use the presenter view, which will ensure that the person who's speaking is first and foremost on your screen, but whilst we have the PowerPoint going, that's not so much of an issue. So this is the third in a series of free weekly webinars that WACOSS is running about key topics facing the community services sector in WA. And so in this first series, we're inviting some input and engagement on some of the key issues and challenges related to recovery and recovery planning, and just getting a bit of a sense, or providing you with a bit of a sense of our initial thinking in terms of what an inclusive plan for recovery needs to look like for WA in order to make sure we're leaving no one behind. So each webinar features a presentation from WACOSS and some of our key partners, followed by opportunities for questions and conversation. So we will be using the breakout function room a little bit later on. We don't have any formal partners for this session, but we do have Taryn Harvey, who's the CEO of the WA Association for Mental Health, joining us. And we also have Professor David Gilchrist from UWA Business School. And these people are both doing really important work in this area too, so they might have some comments and reflections to share with us a little bit later. We've been really overwhelmed with interest from the sector for these. So as I mentioned, we had about 80 registrations for this one, and I think some of our future webinars are really pushing that 100 cap. So we do hope that you find the presentation and the conversation useful and enjoyable. So today's webinar is focused on the care economy, and Chris Toomey, who's the social policy lead at WACOSS, will discuss a bit about what is the care economy, some barriers to care investment, and why the care economy is important for recovery planning. And so we will make these, before I hand over to Chris, we will make these slides available to you as well. And a recording of the webinar will go up on the website probably a week or so after the webinar, just to allay any questions that you might have. While Chris is speaking, if you do have any questions or comments you'd like to make, we just encourage you to make use of the chat function. And we find we get some really good conversations happening alongside the presentations. And so without any further ado, I might just hand over to Chris.
Hello, Kaya. Nala Karik Nungamot, I'm Karik Nijibuja. So look, today in terms of talking about the care economy, there's a couple of things that we're looking to do. So this is very much in the first place, it's a bit of briefing and background, hence this discussion about what is the care economy, why are we talking about it, what do we mean when we're saying it, and what is it we're trying to achieve. But I guess it's also, for a lot of us, this is sort of the start of a bit of a journey around developing a new approach to the way we're working on things, and really some strategy around how we're being more effective in our influence and advocacy to government. So a starting point here is usually when we talk about the care economy, we're talking about community services, but often that also is wider in terms of the broader health and social services category. And one of the challenges we often have in getting data about the care economy is, do we actually have good data? What are the categories involved? And hence I've referred to that ABS category there. But really the core thing of the discussion around the care economy has really been how do we provide some hard-nosed economic analysis of the return on investment of resources that go into health and social services or community services. How do we kind of demonstrate the impact that they have, how do we kind of measure and really highlight the social benefit that it delivers. But the reason that we're doing this is very much as a strategy to influence government and public sector decision makers. It's how do we make sure the work that we're doing, the social benefit that we're delivering, kind of addresses and informs some of their thinking and their outlook on life, particularly when it comes to being able to influence decisions and analysis around government, state and federal budgets. So one of the challenges there is how do we kind of make sure that what we're putting forward is being taken seriously and is really having that kind of influence. When it comes to the stuff around the care economy, a real key focus of this has been some of the modelling around the value and return that social services deliver. So we've done some key stuff here, and David Gilchrist is with us on this, which was the landscape reports that WACOSS produced with the Curtin Not-for-Profit Initiative a couple of years back, which were really about, you know, the size and impact of the sector, how many people we employed, those sort of things. The other thing that I wanted to say is that the care economy stuff is about language and framing, and there's both kind of benefits and drawbacks to that. So, you know, the benefit is that it kind of highlights some key things about you know, social services as an industry. So how many people we employ, how many people we support, what percentage of employment, what percentage of the economy do we represent. It also then gives us an opportunity to provide some proof around how we leverage better community outcomes. What are the multiplier effects? What are the outcomes in terms of individual and community well-being? But also then you can draw that to what are the productivity gains, what are the wider effects on the economy that we have when we deliver care and support services to people that may address barriers that they have to work, they may help them realise their full potential. So hence that's where we're talking about multiplier effects. And I guess those multiplier effects when it comes to the care economy actually happen more and in different ways than in standard industries and workplaces, because certainly you're talking about the multiplier effect of the people who are employed and the value of the work that they deliver. But then you've also got what's the impact that it has on the people who receive those services and their broader impacts on their productivity, their engagement with the economy. However, I guess the other thing is that there are also drawbacks about using this language. So focusing on talking about the economy tends to highlight some things, but it can take away from other things. So it can, you know, distract from the stuff that's about participation and social inclusion, just as an example. The other thing that I wanted to highlight here was around that multiplier effect and around that framing was how some of the discussions, for instance, around work and mental health and that role in the economy really highlights different things, and how they highlight different things, particularly in their response to the COVID crisis. So certainly we want employers to think about employee mental health because it's a good thing to do. But also it's very much something that is about their resilience and adaptability in a crisis. It has direct links to occupational health and safety. It has direct links to their productivity. But also for employers who are investing in the mental health and well-being of their employees, they get a return in loyalty and belonging. It means their workers will want to turn up. It means they're committed to the work that they do. It means they'll actually be thoughtful and thinking about how they're contributing and doing things better during a crisis. So those are a few of the key issues we wanted to raise. Look, the other stuff here, we'll provide some links later today. I've just thrown these things up quickly. I'm not going to talk to them in great detail, but these are kind of some of the core pieces of evidence around the care economy. So one of the pivotal papers has been this work that came out of the UK Women's Budget Group in 2016, and this was actually commissioned by the International Trade Union Confederation, and it was particularly focused around better documenting and showing the value of women's work. And they did this analysis across 7 OECD countries, which includes Australia, and hence it's particularly relevant to us. And at the time, it was showing that an investment of 2% of GDP in the care industries would create 1.5 million jobs. So it was more than double the jobs that they would see by investing the same amount into other areas like construction, but also it was particularly providing jobs for women, and it was providing jobs that had a bigger multiplier effect. So since that first paper, there have been a couple of things that have just come out this year that have progressed that work and applied it directly to OECD economies in post-COVID response. You know, how does it directly relate to stimulus there, and kind of basically showing, you know, updating that to make it more relevant. I also wanted to point to some more local work. So there's a couple of really good reports that have been done just recently, and there've been a couple of webinars that the Australia Institute have run. So I'd encourage you to also go and look at these reports on their website and check out some of these things. And so one of these has been specifically around some modelling and some costs around the value of childcare. And we know this has been an issue that's really impacted on us during the COVID crisis. And there's been a huge concern that's been shown by the community, both about the initial impacts that the failure of the childcare system would have on frontline workers during the COVID crisis, but then also the concerns around how government policy and response has been inadequate in this space, the decisions to exclude childcare workers from the JobKeeper payments, and the decisions to wind back the free childcare that had been introduced for the part of the crisis. So we're actually expecting an announcement on this today. I don't know if it's happened yet, but it's going to be interesting to see what would happen here. But I suppose one of the things that this has highlighted has been government attitudes around stimulus, what counts as work, where they're prepared to put money, and hence we've seen this very different gendered approach to stimulus and support during the crisis, which has tend to favour men's work. We've seen more women and young people who lost their jobs during the crisis, and it's also then highlighted how much of that work is insecure, part-time and casual. I've also pointed to two other key documents that we'll give you links to. The work we've done around the care economy in our 5 key ideas for community recovery. There's also an excellent fact sheet that Anglicare have produced. I'm not sure if that's up on their website yet, but we'll also kind of share that with you and give some links to it. And it kind of points to some of the ongoing work that's happening here in WA. I did want to, in talking to that evidence, I kind of wanted to highlight a couple of the key findings for us. So the care economy in Australia is worth an estimated $762.5 billion and employs 20% of the Australian workforce. The scale and importance of that is absolutely mind-blowing.
Hey Chris, sorry.
Yeah.
I've got, David has a point linked to that around contribution to GDP. So I might just throw to...
Oh yeah, go for it, David. You'll have to unmute.
I have to unmute. Yeah, I'm not used to unmuting, so thanks for that. Look, I was really just going to reinforce, I guess, what you're saying generally, Chris, in relation to the economic numbers around this part of the economy. And I think 2 things really come to mind. The first one is that while we tend to refer to this as the care economy, it's actually the mainstream economy. It's a substantive part of the mainstream economy. It's legitimate economics as opposed to sort of pushing a barrow. And I think the whole sector needs to sort of adopt that attitude. I think the second thing is that in terms of gross state product, we're still working through quite a few numbers on this in terms of determining what we call the net value added. But proportion of the economy that comes under this umbrella in Western Australia would easily contribute at least 10% of growth GSP to in net value added terms. So in other words, the economy is 10% richer as a result of this sector and the work it does. And I think that's also a really important point to highlight, because we still have a very traditional view of the sector as being a sink for government funding, as opposed to being an economic driver. And we've been arguing this for many years now, but I think that's a really important point to make as well.
Excellent. Thanks for that, David. I suppose following on from that, like some of the analysis was showing that for every $1 million that government would spend in Australia on the care economy, it would create 10.6 direct jobs for women, 4.3 direct jobs for men. And that's compared to spending the same $1 million in construction, you would get 1 job for a man and 0.2 of a job for a woman. So, but the other point as well is that, you know, if you are spending your stimulus spending on people rather than stuff, you know that it gets respent and recirculated quicker into the economy. And particularly when that money is going on to comparatively low paid women, we know that they're going to spend that money more directly and immediately on essential goods and services. So the multiplier is quicker and more intense. You also raised a point there around attitudes, and this was kind of the next bit that I was getting to. So this is some of the things around the barriers to investing in the care economy. And so one of those is very much around government attitudes. So there is a question about whether or not the evidence is convincing. And so this is actually some of the discussions we've recently been having with Department of Premier and Cabinet, Treasury and Finance around whether or not they get it and why aren't they investing more into the care economy. And I would say the answer is yes, they get it theoretically, but there's a pile of challenges around it. Part of it is it's not familiar or proven, so they may be convinced by the arguments, but then they have to convince political decision makers. And also about, you know, what's the level of proof about how you do it in Australia or WA? And we've pointed to some of that stuff, but I guess it's an area where those arguments still need to be proven here. But there's been particular and different barriers when it's come to the immediate kind of crisis and stimulus response in COVID, because what we've seen here is, in a way, government had kind of put the shutters up and they've very much focused on, well, our immediate response is what we know how to do well and quickly. And so hence, you know, a lot of what they've done is simply gone to construction because that's something that they've done in the past. They know how to do. They've got a whole pile of stuff that's there that's shovel ready that they can roll out. Shovel ready doesn't even make sense when you're talking about social services. But it certainly comes back to what David was saying about that attitude, that social services are seen as something that are a drain on public resources. You know, they're something that we commit to and have to keep paying for. They don't have the same framing that we see in health and education around the benefits and the multipliers. And so this is also why we've had this barrier around, are they essential services? Are they things that are funded in an ongoing way based on community need and community expectations, or is it ad hoc, decision making? The other thing is that when it's come to the stimulus response, they've wanted to do short-term one-off things. There's a real reluctance when it comes to community services to the idea, well, if we start funding a service, it becomes an entitlement to people that we need to fund in perpetuity. And so I guess there's a difference between what are the services we identify that are immediate part of the crisis response and what are the services that we identify where there's ongoing unmet need that should be delivered on anyway, and what are some of those services where we know there's going to be more need into the future. So the other two barriers that I've got there, one is very much around lack of public sector capability to roll out the programs effectively. And this has been one of the discussions locally that kind of indicates that often Treasury and Premier and Cabinet actually don't necessarily trust that social programs within the public sector can be designed and got out quickly and effectively. They're concerned that they don't necessarily have good mapping of community need, good information on how they would target services that they can quickly then cost them, say this will be the return on the investment, these will be the social outcomes. So
sorry, just one more comment there from David around pump priming.
Yeah, sure thing.
Thanks very much. Sorry to butt in, but I think too the other thing about pump priming, Chris, is that while things like COVID, we certainly didn't predict that COVID would be here when we were sitting here 6 months ago. The cause of economic downturn is not necessarily predictable, and the timing's not predictable, but the downturns are predictable. And we know that in 3 to 4 years, we're going to have another economic downturn. We know that pump priming is going to be required. I think one of the facets of this broad discussion is actually setting up a set of priorities ahead of the game in terms of what investment government should make and how they could make that investment, including in relation to construction, more effectively by investing in this sector as opposed to perhaps investing in others, or worse still in relation to COVID, the very, very unproductive way that they've attempted to invest.
Great, thanks for that, David. I was actually going to jump to questions now. I also wanted to ask Taryn if she wanted to offer some comments on the discussion previously around mental health and the care economy.
So I think we have Chelsea from WAM joining us instead of Taryn. Chelsea, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, hi everyone. Sorry, Taryn was unable to make it, but thanks, Chris. So you've got me instead. Yeah, that's really great work, Chris, and we've looked at all the work that you've done as well, David, and that the mob at Anglicare have done as well. And certainly we think that, you know, this is a really important conversation to have, and we're looking at the productivity impacts as well as the immediate investment. Probably many of you know that there is a current Productivity Commission inquiry into mental health, which is looking at the social and economic benefits of a mental health system that actually works for people, and is, you know, very much saying what all the mental health inquiries have said before, but that you need to be consumer centred and that you need to invest in a functioning system, and that there's a whole lot of jobs and social investment that comes with that, but that the social and economic participation payoffs are very clear. I think the challenge is, you know, competing with, I thought it was an interesting point that you made, Chris, about the, you know, in a crisis, governments do what they know how to do, and that seems to be rolling out, you know, business innovation programs and roads and school building maintenance and so on. And I think it's something about the status of our sector that we aren't perceived as being, you know, an important part of the economy or even an important part of our society, that we're still kind of relegated to leftist, you know, bleeding hearts that are trying to help people rather than a really important investment in the future of our society and our kids. We are, you know, trying to, well, we will be doing some work to cost up the jobs and economic impacts of the investment that we're calling for in the lead up to the state election in the mental health sector, linked to our Prevent, Support, Heal campaign, and looking to, you know, certainly working with industry bodies and some of the other stakeholders in terms of the business world in Western Australia to get their buy-in to that. And certainly from a mental health perspective, we're having some success there in that the impacts of COVID they're seeing is, even in Western Australia, having a very significant mental health impact on their workforce, and they're very concerned about that. So I think there's a case to be made as well for how we collectively work beyond our sector and try and build that support. You know, if you look at how you win policy change. It's not from just us, is it? Even though I think we do have very well informed asks, and we have, you know, collectively as a sector, a whole range of shovel-ready programs that could be rolled out. They're not perceived as such. So
Yep.
I guess just to say, yes, we're on the same page, I think, together collectively, and to give a shout out to our Prevent, Support, Heal campaign, and I'll put that in the chat box. And yeah, thanks for the work that you're doing. And I think, you know, in the COVID environment, we need to, you know, be aware of the risks of this narrative. But I think in the COVID recovery environment, it probably is a really important angle which to pursue to raise our, you know, ideas about what kind of society we want Western Australia to be, and what we need to do to get there.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Okay, excellent. Thanks for that, Chelsea.
Did anyone else have, oh sorry, Chris, did anyone else have any questions? If I'm having a look for anyone who might have a hand raised, but if you want to just start speaking if I don't see you. No. Okay, I think you can take it away, Chris.
Okay, great. I'm also now keeping an eye on the Zoom chat as well. Which is, here we go, controls are back. What I was going to talk now about was specifically the role of the care economy in COVID recovery. So I kind of talked already about that stuff around effective stimulus. So, you know, how much more effective is the care economy than other types of economic stimulus in terms of those additional multipliers. I wanted to highlight a couple of other things. One is what's kind of been disappointing as that kind of business as usual stimulus approach has been, surely our response in the crisis, we should be prioritising creating jobs for those who've lost them. So yes, certainly there is some risk to the construction industry of an economic downturn, but actually when we look at who lost jobs in the first phase of the COVID lockdown, it was predominantly women and young people. It was people who were in casual and insecure work. And the industries where people have lost jobs have largely been social service industries in terms of people who have people skills. So tourism, hospitality and the arts, for instance. So certainly as well, there's a bit of an alignment where if you're saying, well, for care work, we need people who care about people, people who've got people skills, surely there's, you know, a better alignment there if we're looking to provide job creation for people who are unemployed and are likely to be in industries that are facing a significant ongoing downturn because of, you know, the shutdown. Look, the other argument is we should be putting stimulus into creating jobs and responses that are very much dealing with the impacts of the crisis. So what is it that we're doing that is about, you know, traditional or direct response to the crisis? What is the kind of assistance we're providing? And so there's a bit of a word salad there. It's emergency relief, financial counselling, mental health, family relationship services. You'd also put alcohol and drug there. There's also family and domestic violence, child protection. Those issues have come up. And then there's very much the stuff around what's our active outreach to people who've lost jobs, who need support in finding jobs, but also then need help in navigating the system and connecting up to where they can get support. So I guess here between that, there's two different aspects. One is those how we respond to the impacts of the crisis. The second is where are there ongoing employment opportunities in the care economy, and that's areas where we've got existing unmet need that we're not servicing, and areas where we know that there's growing future need. So we know we've got growing need in aged care and disability services, and in fact, you know, the State Training Council modelling suggests in the next decade or so, we're going to need to double or even triple the workforce in those areas. But the problem is at the moment, we're not investing in that training. We don't really seem to have the plans for that. And the risk is that in a decade, we will be looking to import a caring workforce from the developing world at the same time a lot of, the rest of the world is looking at the same thing. And another clear area there of unmet and future need is around early childhood education and care. There's a pile of other areas at the moment where we know that there's a lot more need than we're actually delivering, and that's right across our sector. And part of this comes back to when are we actually moving to an approach to community services that's based on a population level of need, that's based on modelling that, and where there's an expectation that every member of the community should have access to essential social services. Look, the other thing that I wanted to mention here, there's been throughout the crisis very strong rhetoric around saying we're all in this together. And what's been interesting has been some of the kind of recent polling that shows that people are believing that people have been convinced that they've experienced for themselves the threat of the crisis. They've got friends or loved ones who've lost their jobs or who are facing that uncertainty, who are facing down a financial crisis, and they believe that we should be leaving no one behind, and they believe that we should be building back better. And so it's really interesting to see this strong change coming through in some of this polling work that actually shows that people want us to build back better and leave no one behind. What has been a little concerning about this is while we're seeing this attitude change across the community as a whole, those whose attitudes don't seem to have changed are those who are actually newly jobless. So that stigma is still there. They're very reluctant to come forward to get services and supports. And we know this is what happened in the 90s recession and during the global financial crisis. And the real risk is that if that stigma gets in the way and they don't come forward until they're truly in crisis, by the time they come forward to get help, they're losing their mortgage, they're losing their small business, they may be dealing with a mental health crisis, they may be dealing with a relationship breakdown. So that's one of the things that's really challenging. But I suppose when it comes to the positive side of that attitude change, it seems that there's been a fundamental shift in community attitudes, and it's very much about how do we build back better? How are we more inclusive? How are we making sure that everyone actually gets the opportunity to meet their full potential? I've thrown up a couple of things here that are just quick reminders about the first forum that we did. And so this is the stuff around what's the role of the care economy in recovery? And so it's very much about that time to get back to normal. How do we make it quicker? How do we make it more effective? And I've just highlighted these are the national disaster recovery principles that are signed on to by everyone. And two of the key things in this is community-led approaches and recognising and building capacity. So again, it's very much highlighting that investment in social infrastructure is really critical. And this brings me to the kind of recovery principles around the care economy that we've started developing. And this is a bit of a work in process, and this is also a bit of a call out to how do we work on this stuff more together. Underlying this, I think there's a very kind of clear and fundamental principle that if we're seeing public investment into economic stimulus and COVID recovery, it should very much be delivering value for money. It should very much be delivering public benefits. It should be investing in things that are good for the good of all of the community, not favouring just one particular sector or a segment. It shouldn't be just simply benefiting one group and leaving others behind. So clearly there are strong principles around targeting those most effective. And so that comes to what are we doing for those who are already disadvantaged and are further disadvantaged by the crisis? What are we doing about targeting the newly jobless? How are we making sure that the resources that we're putting in are dealing with the direct impacts of the crisis? But then a second thing is about, well, it should also be around the longer term impact. It should be about enhancing community resilience and cohesion. So how are we making sure we're building back better? How are we making sure that what we're doing is making us more resilient for the future, for the next crisis? So this then kind of harks back to those things that I was showing in the recovery principles around what you're trying to do is you're trying to reduce the crisis impact, you're trying to reduce the recovery time, and you're trying to reduce future vulnerability. And then the other thing is, what are we doing that's really about the long term and about the sustainability of our response? And that's both kind of social and environmental sustainability. And that's come very clearly through in some of that attitudes stuff. So there's some kind of core underlying kind of principles that are sitting under this: addressing need, making sure that what we're doing with kind of public response and investment is equitable and inclusive, making sure that we're actually thinking about how we leverage better outcomes for everyone, a focus on delivering value, a focus on increasing the productivity of our whole economy by investing in people, by addressing their barriers, by making them more resilient. And then how do we spell sustainability? It's not like that, sorry about that. but anyway, so there's some of the key principles that have come through this for us. Opportunity now for any more questions, and then we're going to go into some discussion of this in the breakout rooms. I'll have a quick look now just to see what's been put up on the chat, but feel free to jump in if you've got some questions or comments.
Looks like a good robust conversation happening on the chat too, Chris, so it's a good read.
Yeah, there's some great stuff there about investing in social capital and the longer term payoff for that. Yeah, certainly the stuff around an open-ended commitment. Again, part of this, look, and I'm looking at Kate's comments there, but it also reflects, I think, some of the wider changes in attitudes around our approach to the economy and some of the stuff that's been coming through in modern monetary theory that's actually showing a fundamentally different way about thinking how we invest in public services and public outcomes, that actually putting in more resources when we know that it's growing the whole economy, that it's making people more productive, that it's improving our lives and well-being is actually a fundamentally good thing to do. So in a way that's a change from seeing it as a drain as to seeing it actually growing the size of the pie and growing the worth and value of our lives and our community.
Okay, shall I set up the breakout rooms now, Chris?
Yes.
Yeah,
I think that would be a good thing, unless anyone else wants to jump in. Let's go to that.
There's still more good conversation happening in the chat, so I want to get you all into breakout rooms so you can share those with other people. So into the chat right now, I'm just popping the link to the public Google document. So as we mentioned at the start of the webinar, the purpose of these is really to be able to get some feedback on the content that we have provided for you, and also just, you know, get a sense of some of your perspectives on some questions that we have. And so in that link is a couple of questions that I'm hoping you can have a think about in the smaller rooms. So in thinking about those barriers that Chris went through around investment to the care economy, have we captured all of them? Is there anything missing and that you think should be added there? What should our strategy be as a sector for encouraging investment in the care economy? And I think we've heard a little bit about, you know, some of the work UWA has done, the campaign that WAM has at the moment, and Anglicare have also done some work on this. So thinking about, you know, the what else we might be able to do and what key messages we might have as a sector in that. And then I've just also inserted those under development recovery principles that Chris said were still a working in progress. And so if that's something you want to have a conversation about instead, you know, have a conversation about that instead. So I'm now just going to put you into rooms. You'll get a little kind of invitation pop up on your screen. So just introduce yourself to who else is in your room, and then, you know, get started on any of those questions, or have your own conversation if you'd prefer to. But if you could just type a couple of dot points into that shared Google Doc, we would really, really appreciate it. So your invitations for the room should be coming now.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Kylie. And I was noting that there was a great discussion about workforce capability and training as another barrier. Okay, I'm going to jump into a breakout room. Catch you there.
Hi everyone, we're just all coming back into the main room after the breakout rooms. I just noticed that there'd been quite a lot of drop off, so I thought I'd get people back just in case we did need to dash off. We just got one room who's clearly having a really good conversation because
I don't want to leave. Yeah.
Oh, well, they're going to be forced to now. Here they are. Thanks everyone for participating in that conversation. Hopefully you got something useful out of it. I know particularly in the room I was in, we're having a really good one. Is there anyone who wants to kind of just give a sense of the kinds of things you spoke about in your breakout room? No?
We'd had an interesting discussion around like the personal value and return that you get of working in the industry. So we'd actually, like, you know, I had someone who'd done that story of going from hospitality to care work, but also saying, well, what were the barriers and challenges that you had around, you know, the cost and access to training and being able to get into work if you weren't already qualified. So.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Chris. Anyone else?
I'll have a go, Kylie, just to, we had a very quick and efficient discussion that identified the principal issues, which appealed greatly to my accounting side, so I was very pleased with that. But essentially we came up with what I might term to be 5 clear priorities out of that discussion. The first thing was expansion of collaboration within the sector and beyond the sector is critical. The second was identifying and communicating how prevention is the way to go, the best way forward. And that leads on to the third element, which really means that we need a communication strategy in order to get the message across to as many people as possible, not just in the policy area and ministries, but also to make these community problems rather than peculiar problems to a small community of government and not-for-profit organisations. I guess the third element then was part of that communication problem or communication strategy is identifying how this activity is part of the mainstream economy. It's not special or separate or different. It's actually an economic activity that is as legitimate and contributes more than areas such as mining, for instance. And then I guess the final point was really it is important for us to start to get an adequate description of the economic aspects of this. So things like the multiplier effect, the value added that's contributed each year and so on, in order for the sector to be able to communicate broadly about what the economics are of this sector and why we're bleating the way we're bleating. That in fact it's good, sound, solid economic policy to support the sector. It's good for everyone in economic terms, not just in social terms. I think that was what we landed on.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, David. I got those down as you were talking. So, you know, 5-point strategy for encouraging investment in the care economy sector solved. Chelsea's asking if you're working on that economic argument, David? Yes? Awesome. And we look forward to being able to hear that and yeah, share that across the sector, because I think you're right, it has to be a broader cross section, right? Just then.
Well, I might take the second then, if it's okay, Kylie, just to say we'd also like to develop it with the sector. So I don't think that it's necessarily useful for us to just come up with an economic textbook and try and apply that. I think we need to make sure that the sector feels they own it, if that makes sense as well, and it speaks to the sector. So we will come back and impose on everyone in that respect when we get to that point.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. Thanks, David. And I might wrap it up there. everyone. So thank you so much for sticking around to the end. I imagine some people aren't so keen on the breakout room conversation and might have dropped off then. But, you know, we found it a really effective way to just hear from you. And I think we wouldn't have had that nice 5-point articulation there unless we had that opportunity for conversation. So thank you for being a part of it. We will, as I said, send all of the information out, and I'll make the chat available to you too, because I think that was a really interesting and informative chat that happened at the same time. So thank you again. Appreciate it. Have a good rest of the day.